Our next topic will be Inspiring Generosity by Christina Andresen and Dimitri Gagianas. Christina is currently serving as Director of Ministries for Orthodox Christian Fellowship. She attended Texas A&M and served as president of her OCF chapter and as a regional student leader. She participated in Real Break twice as a student to Guatemala and to Constantinople. She has co-hosted the OCF podcast for 2 years and has been a part of the OCF staff since August 2011, where she works to strengthen OCF chapters and student leaders. She is joined today by Dimitri, a recent graduate of Ohio State University. He currently works as a clinical specialist for Medtronic, a medical device company based out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Dimitri is a former OCF College Conference East leader. Along with Christina, he co-hosts the podcast Sirach, Meech, and Teens on Ancient Faith Radio. Welcome, Christina and Dimitri.
All right, if we could pray. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Open, O doors and bolts of my heart, that Christ the King of glory may enter. Enter, O my light, and enlighten my darkness. Enter, O my life, and resurrect my deadness. Enter, O my physician, and heal my wounds. Enter, O divine fire, and burn up the thorns of my sins. Ignite my inward parts and my heart with the flame of your life. Enter, O my King, and destroy in me the kingdom of sin. Sit on the throne of my heart and alone reign in me, O you, my King and my Lord. Amen. So, real quick before we jump in, I'd like to revisit something from approximately 4 hours ago. I was getting a little twitchy in the back when we were having our panel about OCF and trying to resist taking over the mic over there, but now that I have this one, I just wanted to take a minute. I think a few things have been percolating this weekend for me that make me want to bring this subject up, but I think especially Katrina's question earlier, specifically about OCF, when maybe peers are, or peer leaders are not setting the example of divine love for those in their group. So she specifically talked about, like, what do you do in a college group where the students themselves are the ones who are being maybe unwelcoming or becoming a barrier for those who are in the midst of struggle. And I think that tied well with the question I was talking to someone yesterday about what do we even mean by an emerging leader? Do we mean just young people taking leadership positions? Do we mean people who are clearly like emerging into leadership? What do we mean by that? And is the goal really that every young person is in a leadership role in the church? And I think I just wanted to soapbox for a minute to say that I think it's good to remember that the goal is that we make disciples for Christ. And amongst those disciples, some will be called into leadership. And as we're calling people into leadership roles, if we forget, though, that their job is to then go and show divine love for others, I don't know if we've succeeded by just giving them a role. I feel very strongly, it's been put on my heart for quite a while now in the context of my own calling, that the verse of greater love has no man than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends. So I think it's good for us to remember, in all the ways we've been talking about encouraging young people to be leaders, that if it ultimately doesn't lead them to a life where they can then lay down their life for their friends, wherever they are, if they can't then enter into the struggle of others, then we've really just given them a task to do, a job to do, and not really shown them what it means to be a leader the way that Christ leads. So I just wanted to tie that back in before we really jumped into our topic of money, which has nothing to do with most of the things I said, but maybe it will. We'll see.
We'll see.
Dimitri, go ahead.
All right, test first. Can you guys hear me? All right, well, I want to say thanks first for allowing me the opportunity to speak. If you guys have heard our podcast before, if you've powered through that before, it might have been a little difficult. But normally I'll rant for a little bit, and then Christina will clear up what I say and make a good point. She'll put a nice bow tie on it. So if you could help me out with that today.
Absolutely.
But I'll just start off with talking about why we're here today. But I actually never really asked Christina why she asked me to come and speak with her. So I'll start off with just assuming why she asked me. And I think it's probably because I'm kind of that target audience that we're looking for today. How do we inspire leaders to be generous? How do we inspire leaders in our church? And what I mean by that target audience is in college and still, but especially in college, I could have gone either way. I liked the church. I grew up going to church camp, but I struggled with the faith. And I was probably a few bad role models or bad experiences in the church away from not taking on as much leadership or going down this journey of growing as a leader in the church and learning from others. So I think that's probably, maybe she won't admit that, but there's the group that, they're born for that. They're going to be leaders in the church. And then there's the group that maybe that's not their calling. But there's a large group that it can go either way. And for us, I kind of want to focus on, at least for me, I want to focus on that group today, that group that can go either way. Because that's just my experience. So I'll kind of talk through that today. And Christina, if you want to talk about your experience and why you're here.
Sure. So, I mean, it's funny how we see things differently, because I hear Dimitri say these things about himself, but really what I've always seen in him is just a real example of always pointing others towards Christ. I remember the first college conference that he led, and he's not a big fan of like prepping something super in advance, so he's like last minute scribbling down his notes for his opening talk, and I'm like, oh goodness, what's gonna happen? And then he gets up and he spoke with such love and joy and openness to others, and he never got on the microphone to make announcements, to tell people what was happening next, without, I felt like, such a strong sense of his own closeness to Christ and his love for others. He spent most of what he probably thought was going to be a really fun job of leading college conference, attending to people who were sick, attending to people who were crying, helping people get signed up for confessions. I've seen such servant leadership grow in you and through God's grace that I really wanted you to be able to share those stories and experiences. So we really want to talk about, I think today, we want to talk about how we inspire generosity. And I think you've already heard a lot of the things. We're going to have some similar themes. And everybody talks about time, talent, and treasure. So I want you to listen for all of those, though we're not really going to do a whole time, talent, and treasure spiel. What we're going to do is we're going to tell you our own stories of how we were called to generosity and responded. And we want you to try to listen in those stories for what you could maybe model in your own mentorship or in your own parish ministries. So I'm going to tell you my first story of my first parish that I was a member of after I got married. I got married pretty young, so I was still definitely in the emerging adults category. About a year into attending that parish, and participating in parish events, but not really in any position. An older woman approached me one Sunday after liturgy, and in my mind, she was like one of the original moms of this parish. She was one of those ladies, the type, who was always setting up something, who was in the kitchen organizing or cooking something. You just had a real respect for her, and you knew that she knew all the ins and outs. She knew the right way to do everything, and she really embodied this virtue of hospitality. So she came up to me after church one Sunday, and she asked me if I would make asparagus for the Palm Sunday luncheon. There was a very we always do this salmon and asparagus, I don't remember, whatever, this meal that's always very similar. And she asked me if I would make the asparagus. She told me she'd be happy to provide me with a recipe and exactly how much to make. And I felt in that moment, I said yes. I was like, okay, I can make asparagus. It was a perfect introduction. I wasn't asked to put on a whole dinner. That would definitely have been too much for me at that point. And I really wasn't left to guess what was right. And even though I definitely felt a little bit of anxiety on her part about whether or not I was going to get it right, and she maybe gave me a little bit too specific instructions on how long asparagus should be roasted, she trusted me when I said, I'm going to do this. I'm going to show up for you. I'm going to bring asparagus to the Palm Sunday luncheon. And as a side note, I want to pause here because I kind of joke a little bit about the over-instruction that I was given. But I actually think it's important when we're the ones being invited into a responsibility that we take seriously the experience and advice of the person who came before us. Even if we can see room for improvement already, or we kind of like feel already equipped, like I can roast asparagus, I'll be fine. Or if we feel a little bit stifled by the "this is how it's always been" talk, I actually think we should stay open and curious and willing to be corrected. Because many times, I'm not going to say all the time, but many times that direction that people are giving us is actually coming from real wisdom and experience. It's not coming from a desire to make sure we never come into our own. And I think if I had been overly offended by getting so much direction from someone else, I might have said, "You know what, this sounds like you're going to be a micromanager, I'm not making asparagus." I would have missed the opportunity to serve and learn. It built trust, though, with her and the person who was handing me the keys, who was passing the baton, that I was willing to find out why it mattered to her that it was done a certain way, and that I was actually willing to just do it her way. Maybe next year, but this time I'm just going to make your recipe. So I think this is important on both sides, that we're careful with how much instruction we give and what our motivations are for giving the instruction, but also that if we're the one receiving, when we're being asked to be brought in, that we aren't too quick to dismiss the experience of someone who's come before us. So while I wasn't asked to put on the whole Palm Sunday dinner, I was just asked for the asparagus, and it was definitely the right ask for me. I was treated as if my asparagus was paramount to the success of the luncheon, and that without my contribution, the community would have felt a real lack. We wouldn't have been able to have our traditional Palm Sunday dinner if I hadn't brought the asparagus. I think being given a responsibility that I could manage and then honored for the gift that I brought inspired me to want to do more then, to be more confident of what I could bring to the community, because I now knew a little bit about the way things are done here, a little bit about the way that I might then navigate the next thing. And by my last Pascha at this parish, before I moved back to Texas, just a few years later, I was actually put in charge of all of the flowers for all of Holy Week, which is a way bigger responsibility than the asparagus on Palm Sunday. But I think I had built trust with the older leaders of the community by saying yes to small things and doing them with fidelity. And I had shown a willingness to learn and respond to correction. And at the same time, I felt confident that I wasn't going to be abandoned by the person who was passing this new big task onto me. She was there telling me, I think that not adaptive leadership. I always forget the box, Holly, that you did earlier. Situational, that's the word, situational leadership. I think the leaders in this community were very good at knowing when they needed to be in which box with me as they were passing on responsibilities to me. And because I was given these responsibilities, it inspired a generosity in me to look for more responsibilities within the parish. I think we've kind of touched on this theme a little bit already, and I just wanted to give you my own example and my own story of how that could really play out in the life of a parish.
Awesome. Thanks, Christina. So I'm going to talk about, Christina mentioned earlier, college conference. And college conference was probably one of the most formational experiences in my college experience. So I'm not going to explain how I got involved in OCF or how I took on that leadership position, because that's not really what this talk is about today. Everyone has a different story of how they got involved in OCF. That's actually one of the questions Christina likes to ask at SLI, which is the training session. It's like a week long at the beginning of the school year, and she likes to ask everyone how you got involved in OCF, and everyone has a complete different story. So that's great, that's beautiful. We want to try and focus on, once the student's already in the leadership position, what drives them to be generous. So at worst, this story will be a nice pat on the back for Christina, because it has driven me to go down that path and take on that responsibility of giving back to the church, generous in leadership positions, and then in also other ways. But at best, I hope it's a blueprint to see that leadership does not necessarily lead to generosity. Just because someone is a leader does not mean that they are going to be generous. There's a step in between. We kind of talked through our experiences and we kind of narrowed them down to two different options, two different steps that are in between that leadership position and then the generosity. So kind of the one that Christina was just talking about was responsibility leading to generosity. So leadership, and because of the leadership, a student takes on responsibility, and then because of that responsibility, they feel the need to be generous. So that's kind of what I'll focus on, is how Christina provided me with the need to be responsible and how that led me to be generous. So OCF was kind of, I had small leadership roles within our local OCF, but it was kind of always on my I should do this list. And as I'm sure many of you know, in college, that list is pretty long when you're in college. There's a lot of I should do this, but the I have to do list kind of gets prioritized, and a lot of times those commitments that you make to clubs or anything else that is on that should do list kind of gets pushed to the back burner and isn't as important. So that's kind of how OCF was for me for a while, until I took on the leadership role. And what really pushed me to make that on the have to do list was that Christina has immense trust in her students, which is not something to be taken for granted for. It's beneficial for two things. One, it speaks a lot to her humility, because she trusts us, and if we fail, which many times I did, especially with meeting deadlines, but if we fail, it's going to be a reflection on her. I mean, people know I was the college conference student leader, but as far as the people in the church that are going to be judging her, she's going to get the judgment and say, why is college conference registration getting pushed back? Why do we not have enough funding? Why is college conference not full yet? And all of that blame is getting put on her. But she had the humility to say, Dimitri, I want you to be in charge of this. And that pushed me to take OCF from that should do and push it up to the I have to do this. I can't put it off, because if I put it off, we're not going to have enough fundraising. And some kid that wanted to come to college conference that has never been before, he's not going to be able to afford to come because I didn't raise enough money. Or we're going to keep pushing back registration, and then people are going to find something else to do over winter break instead of come to college conference. So that, because she trusted in me, it pushed it to my have to do list, and that created this level of responsibility for me. And once you have that responsibility, it is a natural inclination. Then you feel that you need to give back. And there's a difference between being told you need to give back and creating an environment where someone wants to give back. And I think OCF did an incredible job of that as well too. So it was, the opportunity was presented, and it was, as leaders, if you want to set an example to give back, this is part of your leadership role. And it was never you have to do this to be on the board, but as we grew together on the student leadership board, that became a part of the job. And it became something that you wanted to do, was to give back in that way. So the last thing I wanted to mention about college conference was I said I missed a lot of deadlines, which I did. I'm not joking about that. One very important part that Christina also took on was this unlimited forgiveness that she kept dishing out to everyone, especially me. And that's especially important for college students, because at least for me, in positions that I was volunteering for, and this is definitely more on me than anyone else, but if someone starts yelling at me for being late on something that I'm volunteering for, it's really easy to kind of pull back and say, this is not worth it. I have school, I have these other commitments, I have sports, I need to stay in shape, all of these other things. It's like, I don't want to be volunteering for this while I'm just getting yelled at because I was 3 days late because I had 3 midterms and 2 finals in 3 weeks, and I'm getting yelled at for this. So like, I'm done. Next year, OCF, I'm absolutely done. Christina understood that we were in college, and looking back now, it's funny. I thought I was like the busiest time of my life, and now I appreciate now as like starting a new role. I feel way more busy than I did in college, and I'm sure as parents, you probably feel busier once you have kids, and life always just keeps getting busier. But when you're in college, it never feels like there's a busier time. So Christina did an amazing job of understanding that and conveying that to us and saying, hey, if you are completely swamped with finals, you can just take a few days, study for finals, and then let me know what you need. But this is your responsibility, and I want you to take control of it. But if you need help, then I can help you out. But she would never step on our toes and say, you're too late, I'm gonna come in and do this. So that was another huge part of, she kept us involved by forgiving us and not getting upset with us, but then also by keeping on that responsibility, she allowed us to lead into that generosity role, because we did feel responsible, and she wouldn't just take over it because she was worried about her reputation and something being late.
That's good. So I think the theme we want to take away from this first part about responsibility is that responsibility is the first way that I think you can invite someone to give generously, by giving someone a responsibility that matters, by giving them something that's their own. And it doesn't really matter the magnitude of the project. It really matters knowing what's the right invitation for each person, and then accompanying them in mentorship. So I hope this is tying together some things from the last couple days. Because I think when we do offer this correct invitation for the correct person, and we walk with them carefully, then they want to then give more. That was my experience with asparagus. Thank God that was Dimitri's experience with college conference. He's, by the way, on the planning committee for the YAL conference that's coming up in Pittsburgh. So they haven't gotten rid of him in leadership possessions with conferences. And I think the two things I want you to notice about this is that, I think this has been said, but it really requires you to know a person well enough to know what's the right invitation. I think Kira spoke to this on the panel earlier of, that person who came to you and said, young adults, be all the things. I've definitely met people who are interested and curious about taking on leadership roles in the church, who have either been kind of insulted a little by being asked too little, and then maybe not so motivated to do the thing, because they're like, do you know me? Do you know what I could do? Like, it would be nice if you matched this to my skills. And I've also met people who say, do you know me? Like, why are you asking me to teach Sunday school? There's no way. That's way too big for me. Like, that's not the right fit. So it's good to know a person well enough to know what's the right invitation. And then it also requires, I think, like we heard yesterday, knowing what kind of mentorship that person needs. Is it more direction, more trust, more listening, more accountability? Because as much as Dimitri likes to say that I was super forgiving with deadlines, I also held him accountable to those things. Like, it wasn't an option for college conference registration to not open, and it was his job to make sure that it happened. So sometimes a person just needs more accountability, and you have to know depending on the person. All right, so the second theme of stories we want to tell you about, a second way I think to inspire generosity, is through gratitude. And I'm going to let Dimitri start off to tell you what his experience with gratitude inspiring generosity has been.
Yeah, so after my freshman year of college, I was blessed to be accepted to a camp you might have heard of. It's not an Orthodox camp. It's called Camp Cadenese. It's a camp for underprivileged youth in the Phoenix area in Arizona. And I'd never even counseled a camp before, so I went there completely blind, first time, no training. Up until I got there, obviously we had a little bit of training. And I kind of went there just with an open heart, ready to experience whatever there was to experience. Now, part of the training was obviously the rules, and it's a camp, rules, regulations, all that stuff. But there was never this demand and this, they didn't make it feel like there's going to be these kids that come from this very impoverished area and you should feel so blessed because you have it so great. They just said, have your hearts open, and whatever you experience, allow that to be your experience and allow God to work through you. So that's how we went through camp. It was the second year the camp had ever run, and it was an incredible experience. It was so eye-opening to me. The first camper that I had, he came in and he set his blanket down on the ground, and I said, "Oh, we have a pillow for you here," and he said, I said, we have a bed for you here," and he said, "Oh no, I don't sleep on a bed. I'm not comfortable with that. I sleep on the ground at home." So from that moment, that open heart that the camp had invited us to walk into the camp with, it created the spirit of generosity, or this spirit of gratitude within me that captivated that whole week, and kind of, it was really, that's the best word to describe the week. I was thankful for what I had at home, but more importantly, I was thankful for the lessons that I learned from these campers, and that I took home with me. That they were, all they cared about was their family and their friends. And I have so many other worries and concerns when I was back at school and grades and all that. So it wasn't even the gratitude that was forced upon me. It was the gratitude that I experienced for myself that then led me down the road to continue to go back, to continue to give back, and to continue to help out with the camp and stay connected with those campers. So that's kind of the other vector to gratitude that we kind of came up with, was that to generosity, was that gratitude will lead to generosity.
And I know Dimitri doesn't like when I out his virtue, but has not only gone back to Camp Katniss many times, but he is also a donor and a supporter, and he has fundraised on their behalf, as have many of the counselors, I think, because of the experience they have had there of gratitude for seeing. I think this gratitude theme goes along with the need of being part of a church that matters. Say it for me, Steve. Empowered with a faith that makes a difference. So I think Dimitri's experience with Camp Katniss certainly falls into that need. And I think my story will as well. So my story of gratitude that turned into generosity is when I moved back to Dallas in 2013. I was, I don't know, mid-20s. I don't remember now. That shows you that I don't know my birthday anymore, and I'm crossing those lines. Anyway, when I moved back to Dallas in 2013, I became a member of the parish where I had grown up. One of the very first things I did in my mid-20s was to join the Philoptochos chapter, which is, if you know anything about Philoptochos, not all that common. And I wasn't doing it to make a statement and be the young person or something like that. I honestly really didn't know what a local Philoptochos chapter did. What I did know was that National Philoptochos had generously and tirelessly supported the two things that had been most pivotal in my spiritual formation, which were OCF and Holy Cross School of Theology. And I knew many of the programs I'd been a part of, the education that I had received was due in fact to the generosity of this group that I really didn't know what they did. And I think this is important because unlike some of these very personal stories and these very relational stories we've been talking about, this one isn't that at all. Really, the women of Philoptochos perhaps had no idea who I was personally, and I wasn't involved in their work while I was in OCF or while I was a seminary student at Holy Cross, but I was benefiting from their generosity. I was benefiting from the work that they were doing. And when the time came, I knew instinctively that I wanted to give back to the ministry that had cared about the things that I had cared about. Even when they didn't care about me as a person, because they had cared about they didn't know me. It wasn't because they were careless. That they cared about the things I cared about in a time that was really important to me. And I think what happened after that, of course, was that I actually learned to care about the things that they cared about. I had never thought to care about people who were nearing death or who had just lost a spouse. But because Philoptochos tends to have older women in it, they're very attentive to the people in the parish who are shut in, who have just lost a spouse, who are grieving in some way. And I actually learned, I think, to care about that stage of life because they had been caring about something that had been important to me while I was young. And I learned from them a million different ways to give. I mean, we have a very lovely Philoptochos chapter at at our parish, I was like, we like pay people's rent when they just like can't pay their rent? Like, this is crazy. We can just do that? I think because a lot of times I had, as a kid, only seen the like raising the money side of things, of bake sales and whatever. It was so eye-opening and transformational for me in terms of how I wanted to live and the kind of generous life I wanted to lead by having these examples in my life. One story that I like to tell people, although I won't say her name because I feel like she would also be upset with me for revealing her virtue. I was riding in the car with the Philopticos president of the time, and we were, I don't remember, going to Costco to buy like sandwiches or something for a coffee hour. And there was a homeless person on the road. And we were just in a car. In Dallas, there's a billion highways. There's not a lot of like stop and get out of your car to help someone. But she had in her glove compartment $5 bills wrapped around icons of Christ, just like lined up for any time she stopped. She's like, I figure if I'm going to give him an icon, I can't give him $1. Like, you got to give him at least $5. And just was like a consistent practice for her. There was no fuss about it. And it's something that because I saw her do it and because she modeled that for me, that I don't do nearly as well as she does, but that I try to implement in my own ways in my own life because she showed me her generosity. So it's interesting to me how the gratitude of having them care about what I cared about actually completely changed how I was generous. And I wouldn't be the person I am or give the way that I give if they hadn't bothered to care about the thing that mattered to me when they didn't even know me. So I think our takeaway here, I hope you gather, is that meaningful and deep experiences, rich ministry that really matters, along with humble support and good examples, inspires a generation of generosity. To Steve's point again yesterday about being a part of a faith that matters, I think when you experience authentic love and generosity of the church community, your response is one of thanksgiving. It's actually Eucharistic. And then it inspires your own laying down of your life. Like I said in my soapbox, I guess. It comes up apparently a lot when I'm writing. Your own willingness to deprive yourself of certain comforts for the sake of others, so that others can experience the love of Christ. You know, we hear that we love because he first loved us, but also that we are Christ's ambassadors. So we have the opportunity to love what another person loves and then invite them in to become an ambassador themselves. Okay, so the last point I'd like to make, Dimitri, please feel free to interrupt me, before we kind of move into our reflection that we have in the booklets for you guys, is I think we need to be careful not to avoid talking about material things as only spiritual, or not to avoid talking about material things as spiritual. There we go, I said it right. Because I've noticed that many times when the Sunday gospel reading touches on wealth, that it seems like it's our automatic go-to to turn that into something where, well, it's not just about the money, and just then to go on and tell you all the ways it's not about the money. It's not about the material things. I'm not negating the fact that there is definitely like these allegorical spiritual ways of reading passages about material things, but I think we should be very careful in our teaching and our preaching that we aren't doing it in a way that robs people of the opportunity to grow in the virtue of generosity, or that kind of maybe even turns them into Gnostics or something who don't really have a sense that the material world really matters. Actually, we talk about this. He mentioned our leadership program. Part of our Summer Leadership Institute for college students is a session on stewardship or generosity every year. And not that long ago, I don't know if you remember saying this, but Dimitri said to me, he's like, God, I used to think it was so weird and like kind of annoying that we would talk about money and stewardship at SLI. He's like, why does this matter? I literally have no money. I'm a college student. But he was like, I'm really glad you did, because now that I have my own money and the freedom to spend it, I actually realize how important this is. So I think it's the last point I want to make specifically about giving of money is like not to over spiritualize the teachings we have from the scriptures about the material things in a way that we actually remove the opportunity for growing in virtue through generosity. All right. Holly, was your 10 minutes like, what was that? Okay, we have a few questions. Dimitri, do you want to read them? That we had in the booklet for you. And we wanted you to have a chance to talk about them at your tables, and then if you'd like, share or come ask questions. Where are they?
I think they're...
Oh, they're up here. Yeah.
All right, so the first question we'll ask you, just reflect on personally first, and then we'll give you some time to talk about with the table and talk with everyone. But if you could think back to the first time you were generous with your time and talents, what were the circumstances that inspired you to give? And what about the first time you gave money regularly?
And I'm just we'll read them all so that you can have some time. What are some ways in which your parish or ministry currently asks for money or volunteers? Do they draw on both responsibility and gratitude? Or are they drawing on other things?
And the last one is, thinking of an emerging leader in your own context, how could you invite them to engage in mentored responsibility or to respond to gratitude?
The first time I gave any money to the church was because I was placed on the parish council and I had to be a member of good standing. So I just felt a little bit pressured.
So you were invited into a responsibility. Yeah, and that responsibility required a certain kind of generosity on your part. Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Tomaida.
Just to get the juices flowing in the room. So when I was in college, I went to a parish that happened to have a priest that he was on he was a retired Navy chaplain, so he had his pension took good care of him. The parish didn't really have any vision to grow, didn't have a lot of land, didn't have a lot of programs, and so everything, the impression was like, hey, we've got what we need. And I don't, you probably aren't familiar with that kind of a parish. But anyway, it was a really unique situation because we just felt like we had what we needed and there wasn't pressure. And over time we realized he's going to retire, we're going to have to bring another priest and we're going to have to provide for his salary and his health insurance and have a vision to grow and change. And so it was really unique in that they invited different clergy to come from the neighboring churches and give stewardship talks. And I just remember, as a young college person, it made a huge impression on me. And a very humorous priest from one of the neighboring parishes that was meaningful to me in OCF, he told several stories about when he and his wife started tithing. And one of the things he said, which really, it always stuck with me, is that he said, I believe that when you tithe, your appliances last longer. And basically all of his stories, though, that always stuck with me, is that the concept is that it's God's money anyway, and that when we act with trust, he provides. And he gave many beautiful, inspiring stories in his life about that.
Before seminary, I was a lawyer for a while, and my home parish was doing a icon sort of renovation or whatever it was, and they wanted to do icons of the 12 apostles. And my mom came to me and she said, oh, the icon of St. Matthew, you should pay for that, because my papu is named Matthew. It's for your grandmother and grandfather. And she's like, she was talking to me about it. I was originally resistant. She was like, for the first time in your life, you have a salary and you're doing well, and this is something that the church needs. So you have this sort of responsibility on your shoulders, and you're doing it as a prayer for two people who formed you and loved you. And I kind of there was this real, I don't know, the way that she described it to me kind of hit me. And now to this day, every time I go to my home parish, because my grandparents have died since the icon was put up, I kind of every time I look at that, it's, I'm reminded to say a prayer for both of them, because that's the spirit in which she asked me to do that.
And it was very clearly tied then for you, the material thing, gift, to the spiritual, because it was a memorial to your grandparents and a connection to a saint and worship. That's great.
And not that every donation or act of generosity has to be in these two groups that we gave, but it sounds like those last two were more under the category of gratitude. You were grateful for the intercessions with the saint, and you were grateful for what your parish priest had done for you. So
the first time that I tithed, I was 16 years old. I got my first paycheck. I was so excited. I was a stock boy at what's now like kind of a Walgreens kind of thing. And I was so excited. It was like $80 or something, whatever it was. I came home and I showed my mom and dad, look at this, I got my paycheck. And Dad said, all right, tithe that to the church. I said, but that's a portion of this. That's my money. He says, no, this is God's. And from the time I was 16 years old, that's what was expected. So it was out of obedience, not out of gratitude or whatever else. It was obedience to my parents. But now as a priest, this is what we do, right? I don't think about it, we just do it. And so when I was first ordained, I was kind of afraid to talk about these things because, you get up there, you talk about money and people are ready to go, it's like, there's certain topics you avoid. And now I'm not afraid to talk about them because I'm not asking you to do something that I'm not willing to do myself. So I'm not being a hypocrite. And God forgive me, sometimes I like watching people squirm a little bit when we talk about this stuff because they're, that it's my money. No, it's not. None of it's yours. Nothing we have is ours. The only thing that's ours is our sin, right? The rest is all God's.
So I think for me, it started from like a place of selfishness because my wife and I, when we were first married, didn't have a lot of money and we were still going to college. And we both like to cook. So we would invite college kids over that didn't have fiancés or weren't married or whatnot, and we would feed them. Initially, I liked for them to eat our food, and it gave me a lot of excitement when they were like, your food is so good. But eventually, it got to the point where we were able to look at this and say, we're actually doing something tangible here for them that they can't run home to have a home-cooked meal. We have no money, but we're still doing something which is giving back. So I think that process for us, it started from something very selfish and like, you like our food too. Okay, this is actually being able to turn to something good. So.
Yeah, God can change that. Just to be respectful of time, I'm going to wrap us up. I'm sorry. We really liked talking about our own lives. Forgive us. We hope to talk to you at the tables a little bit more later, but I think one thing I heard that I want to make a little distinction before we close up is to remember that obligation can become generosity, but they're not equivalent. I think I think the reason we specifically focused on gratitude and responsibility as these sort of doorways into generosity was to make sure that we pushed all of us past just the idea of obligation. Because I think to have a generous spirit is sometimes to give more than a tithe. It's to give your whole life, or is to give when it's very difficult for you to give of time or talent or treasure. So not to discredit obedience to a parent. Thank God, like for the parents who are showing their children that way of giving and for, just obeying that. But I think we can push beyond that to remember that a generous spirit is more than just doing something because we're told. And so I think with the second question, just something that Dimitri and I kind of talked a little bit about was that there's really, I think you wrote this actually. Why am I reading what you wrote? When you want to say the little thing about, there's really a difference between telling people that they should be grateful, and I think you said this already, creating an environment where gratitude and generosity are kind of the natural response of the experience. So I think if there's anything we want you to kind of hold on to is how, as we're investing in our emerging leaders, as we're cultivating young people to take on leadership positions, are we creating an environment where their generosity is going to be a natural response to the experience of God's love and not just another rule that they're following to fulfill an obligation because I don't know that will sustain them throughout their life. So we will close up now. If you want to ask questions later, we will do that after the next session, I guess. So thank you.
Thank you.